What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now Plus. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about the Black Myth Wukong Game Awards controversy that's going around, and I think it's blowing up probably further than it needs to. That's definitely part of it. So I do want to talk about what happened, what are my thoughts on it, and are people, I guess it depends, are people overreacting, or maybe they not? So basically, as we know, that Black Myth Wukong did not win Game of the Year, okay? And that's not, honestly, to me, all that surprising. I always got the sense, in fact, actually, I predicted this a while ago, if you just look at Metacritic, and I'm not saying Metacritic is great for, like, almost anything, but it depends on the value you put on it. You know, when you look at Metacritic, and it's the reviews from the journalists, and a lot of these same journalists are on the board picking Game of the Year. And that's something you have got to remember, I think, going into the Game Awards. And I think this all connects, right? So going into the Game Awards, you think, okay, Game of the Year, highest rated game. It's probably a semi-easy thing to just look at and say, okay, can you guess what will win Game of the Year based off what had the highest Metacritic score? I think Astrobot did actually have the highest Metacritic score, but, you know, Final Fantasy, Metaphor, Astrobot, those were all there. Black Myth, I think, only got like an 83 on Metacritic. Now, I'm not saying that those games are necessarily 90s and Black Myth is necessarily 80s, but that's what the journalists gave it, and then those same journalists are on the panel voting for Game of the Year. Basically, it's not just because the game sold well was a guaranteed winning Game of the Year, and that's something that I called pretty early. I called probably a month ago, actually, at this point. And then we get this statement from the CEO. So this was all translated. So he said the 4 nominations were a first for a Chinese game. Yet I must admit there's a sense of loss and regret. More than anything, though, there's a letting go of illusions. The games nominated this year were all exceptional, but honestly, I still can't figure out what the criteria were for Game of the Year. I feel like I came all the way here for nothing. I think somewhat also of a big thing that came out with all this stuff is the speech that he wrote 2 years ago. Now, this one's bold. I kind of like the cockiness, but at the same time, it's like, well, I don't know what you expected to get back from people telling them that you wrote a speech 2 years ago. So here's the next part of it. So he said, I completely understand these feelings and share the frustration because behind these emotions lies not pain or malice, but dignity and confidence. When you're so confident and yet don't receive the recognition you expected, it's natural to feel upset. In fact, I wrote my Game of the Year acceptance speech 2 years ago, only to never get the chance to deliver it. Okay, so honestly, in terms of what I want to say, short but sweet, and yet I'll probably end up making this a longer video because I just keep talking and talking. I can respect that confidence. I don't actually think he said anything all that bad. I think the idea of like, well, I don't know how the Game Awards work and I flew out here for nothing. I mean, it did win and it could have won all 4. So like, you never know. So it's like, I don't think you really flew out there for nothing. And you kind of do know how the Game Awards work. It's a panel of like 100+ journalists and they all vote. And, you know, we get 10%, which I think is next to nothing technically. And they get 90% and they pick Game of the Year. And it's kind of just simple as that. You could say, okay, well, do they put more focus on story or gameplay, combat, you know, stuff like that, and maybe that sways the decision a little bit more. That's fair, I suppose. You know, and even the speech thing. Now, you know, and I like confidence. I like people that can be confident like that. Here's okay in terms of being short but sweet. I don't think what he said is all that, like, that we have to blast the guy or anything, but I would have actually preferred he leaned into the fandom instead, leaned in a positive way. So he kind of does it a little bit in both those paragraphs, I guess, that we read, where he talks about, you know, it's not pain or malice. It's not about going on the attack. It's more about other things. If I were him, okay, and I'm not, obviously, but if I were in that situation, what I would have said would have been that part, that first part, but then I just would have went towards the fans, right? Where it's like, it's not about being upset. It's not about being, you know, angry at the games that win. It's about celebrating our game. And it's about thanking, you know, the 30+, you know, you can even get cocky. You can even get almost like egotistical and say, you know, our game, and I'm trying to think like, you know, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. Elden Ring, I don't actually think outsold Black Myth. I think Black Myth actually did outsell Elden Ring. And Metaphor, Final Fantasy, I mean, Black Myth probably did 10, 15, 20 times the sales of some of these games. That doesn't mean it's better. That does not mean it's better. But if you're him and you are confident and you are in the, hey, my game deserves it. Like, I thought our game was awesome. You thought our game was awesome. I would just lean into that and say, like, hey, this is a game enjoyed by millions upon millions of people across the world, and we want to thank you. And we did a spectacular job. And so what? We didn't win those awards. Honestly, and I talk about all of these topics so many times, and I do it because they can constantly come back up, and I can reference what I said in the past. I have said things like this before where it's like, and again, if you're him, you kind of just lean into the idea of they don't matter. That's another way, actually, of going about this whole thing is, instead of saying that the Game Awards you don't understand, like they don't make sense, I mean, I don't think that's actually true. I think they do make sense to a degree. I mean, they change the rules whenever they feel like it with Elden Ring and stuff, but, they do generally make sense, and they do follow, like, a formula. Like, they haven't radically changed all that much in these years, right? Again, if you're him and you're taking the approach of like, well, people really liked our game, we really liked our game, then just go with that. It's something that, again, I have said multiple times in the past. The Game Awards matters really only to them. And that's okay. Like, if I'm up for an award, I'll probably care about the award, and very few others will. And I feel kind of normal. I feel like it's some journalist thing. It's some almost like Hollywood type virus or whatever that kind of infects the gaming industry as well, where it's like, every person sitting at home has to be so invested in what wins best ongoing game. And it's like that, you can. I'm not saying you can't, but it's not really the case. Most people that watch the Game Awards flat out do not watch it for the awards. When I say nobody, a vast majority of people do not care what wins anything. The only people that care generally are in that room that are there live, and then there's studios back home. And I'm not trying to diminish it in any way, or at least in that way. I know they care. Like winning for Astrobot to win, they looked jazzed. They looked very happy, and you feel for them. And you know that their studio is probably jumping up. They're probably throwing a party because of that. Like, it does matter, but only matters to certain people. And that's something I've talked about that for years. And I talked about that leading into it. And I feel like that's the part that he kind of... I get it to a degree because these are the people that it affects. But if you want to take the angle that this guy took, it's like, well, why don't you kind of go all the way and just go into well, do people really care about it? No, not really. The people that care are the ones that win or lose, I guess, right? And ultimately, like, your game should stand on its own. Your game should make an impact on people. It's, again, something I talk about where, if you're going to change your game of the year or something because it won an award at the Game Awards, then you need to question yourself. You should feel good enough about your own opinion to say, yep, Astrobot was my game of the year. Yep, Black Myth was my game of the year. Yep, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown was my game of the year. If that's what you believe, then, and the Game Awards doesn't award your game something, and all of a sudden you change your mind, well, were you ever that confident in the first place, right? So, again, that's kind of where I would lean into with Black Myth, is just, it sold like 30 million units. Now, a lot of those, Chinese market, that was a vast, vast majority of those, but it was played across the world. I played it. I loved it. I think it's a great, great game. It's not my game of the year, but it's a great game. And I think you can lean into that and just say, yeah, it doesn't really diminish what our fans think of it. It's just that it didn't win an award. And, he kind of gets that, but then he goes a little bit off track with, I don't understand how it works. And, they're writing the acceptance speech 2 years ahead, and there were reports that, like, they were crying in the, it does come across cringe in a way, but then you take a couple, I would say this, myself personally, okay? When I first saw those articles and stuff talking about, like they were crying in the audience and stuff, it's like, my initial thought was, I don't really think that's all that necessary, or I don't get it. But I'll be honest, like, taking a couple steps back, well, it's everything that I just said. Like, that is your creation, and if you believe that it's so good and you want it to win bad enough, of course, you're going to be upset, if it doesn't win. Now, I would question, like, do you need it to win so much as, like, validation that you're going to cry about? Like, that's like the cringe that I would analyze, and even still, like, right now, I would think about it and say, I get it. I get it, too. Again, in terms of, like, selfishly, just go to yourself, right? You make something, and it's up for something. It's in a competition, right? Like, top 3 get a trophy, or, it's getting an award or something. And if you don't get it, I mean, if you put your soul into that thing and you believe in it and you care about it, and then it doesn't win, well, of course you're going to get, upset about it. So in that way, I totally understand it. But then you have to think, okay, well, why do you value that award so much? And that's different per person. Like maybe it's a school award, and I mean that can matter. It also cannot, right? Depends on what it is and what part of your life you're in and how much you care about it or things like that, right? So even that one, it's like I get it to a degree. I feel like the issue is probably nobody else did it, right? Like if nobody else is crying and it's like, okay, well, then they're kind of just like the only ones. That's a little awkward. Or, if he's the only one that wrote a speech, a lot of them don't write speeches. And I do think that probably comes off better, right? Because it's like, oh, no, they might do it on purpose. They might say, oh, I didn't write a speech. We didn't think we were going to win. But in their head, they're like, yeah, we had a good chance of winning. It's just the game. It's part of the game. It's playing the game in that way. Not a video game, like playing this like Hollywood, gaming development type thing. It's just kind of being a part of it, right? I mean, like you can talk about it for a couple minutes. You can make a video or two. None of it really matters, okay? At the end of the day, Black Myth is a great game. It got recognition, I think, enough, and also I just don't even think it really matters. I truly, at the end of the day, because as I constantly say, 5 years from now, if you quiz, even me, like I have watched so many of these, I look back and I look at who wins things, for knowledge and just to kind of remember it for videos. 5 years from now, if you quiz me on a random category from this year's Game Awards, I probably can't tell you what would win it. And I am plugged in more than 99% of other people. I'm not saying I'm better. I'm saying I just know these things. I remember them. I even focus on them. Even though they don't actually matter, I still do it. And if you quiz me in 5 years, to be honest with you, right now, this is just flat out sincere, I don't remember what Black Myth even won. And I don't care because I know it's a good game. It's a fun action game. It tells a good story. It's challenging. It can be frustrating at times, but it's an overall good game. I truly cannot remember. I think it was in that article. I just skipped over it. I don't even know what award it won. And within 5 years, I definitely won't. I also won't even remember what it was up for, except for Game of the Year, right? Like, you will probably remember that it got snubbed, if you think that or whatever. It was a Game of the Year contender, and it didn't win. You might remember that in 5 years, but if you can tell me the other categories it was nominated in, even right now, without looking, don't cheat, then, you be my guest. But, and again, I think that just all connects. It's not that big of a deal. You can make it a big deal. That's fine. But I think to the vast majority of people, it's not a big deal. Nobody really cares, and nobody will care going forward. And again, one final time, that's what I probably would have leaned into if I was him, talking about these statement type things. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon's turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.